Welcome back at Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube live channel. I tell you what, we got an interesting segment here because I've known this guy for, well, at least half of my adult life, and I remember his time back in Southwest Baltimore as a traditional pharmacist, and then for many, many years in the holistic space. My son and I seeing him many times, as well as through other partners in my business. He's now at Curio Wellness, and I've started to tell the story of Curio, and he got me a really cool sort of purple Curio. It says number 0 on it with an underscore. Brian Sanderoff here, longtime holistic pharmacist, regular pharmacist, and now preaching the gospel of Cannabis 101 and medicinal. And obviously, this has come to Maryland, Brian, and you've come 25 years through this thing, and I want to welcome you in. You and I have talked sports on about a million different occasions and various times and places. You're as big a Ravens fan as I know. And I guess in the last couple of years, the world has changed for where cannabis, the state of Maryland, where Colorado and California and other places that I visit frequently, and how we're talking about cannabis and how we're talking about opioids and alcohol and all sorts of things in our society. And I know you're out there dispensing great education. You've been very helpful to me and my family as well. You know, my wife's a 2-time cancer survivor, and we watch television too. We had a lot of questions, and I'm glad a guy like you is in my life, quite frankly, to give me answers.
Well, I appreciate that, Nestor. First of all, thanks for inviting me into the family. I really appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to having some fun with you here on the air and helping to educate people. It's interesting. That conversation has changed, and to me, I find it profound that nothing has changed about cannabis. It's the conversation and our understanding of cannabis as a medicine. And you know, I see a parallel with the whole herbal nutritional world that I've been in for the past 20 or 25 years. Nothing's changed with saw palmetto or ginkgo biloba. It's our understanding of how it works that has evolved, and it's the same thing with cannabis now.
Well, I think it's fascinating. Give your background on radio, because you have been calling me for 20 years. You did a radio show, an internet show, literally before you spoke about cannabis, and literally probably during the time where you were a traditional pharmacist dispensing drugs as we know them in America in all sorts of ways to all sorts of people for all sorts of reasons that doctors sent them in. And, you know, you went to school for that. So I think going back to that to say, you were running football back when they were just running plays and not throwing the ball, right? So as the evolution of football changes, and the evolution as we understand medicine in our country changes as well, from where cocaine was dispensed 100 years ago, right, through corner pharmacist or chemist in those days. They still call them chemists when I'm running around Europe. But your background goes to that, and I mean, you were writing scripts for the hard stuff, right, back in the day, right?
Dispensing them, yeah, that's true. So I graduated pharmacy school in the early '80s and went right to work in a downtown community pharmacy in Pigtown. And a couple years later came to own that store and actually another pharmacy a little bit up the road. And had been in my store for about 10 years when I started to question how well I was really helping people. And
can you give me an example? I mean, I've heard you've given this speech a million times, and you're given a 101, and I'm sure you'll explain it. But I want to ask you specifically, were there people you were dispensing things to hard? I mean, what was the nastiest drugs that you were dispensing and seeing the result of? Do you have a firsthand experience of something where you're like, oh my God, I'm contributing to like not good things happening to this human being in Pigtown?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the opioids that people would get, sometimes originally innocently because they had an accident or they had a surgery, and then it became, unfortunately, the bane of their life. That story is very, very common. I
think of Brett Favre, right? Because I'm a sports fan. Brett Favre has spoken out, at length about Vicodin, right? Like literally.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of stuff you were giving people, and seeing regular Brett Favre kind of people, regular people finding themselves hooked on something, right?
Yeah, no question. But it's, to me, it's even deeper than that because it's more of a philosophy. The analogy I always use is that, look, if you're driving around in your car and you see that little red oil light on your dashboard light up, you have a couple choices. You can take it to the mechanic, find out what's wrong and get it fixed, or if not, just take a piece of black tape and put it over the light and you don't see it anymore. That's what we do in medicine, especially for the chronic diseases of aging. And so even things that may seem as benign as a blood pressure medicine ultimately are feeding the machine of this business that we call medicine and not really healing people, because someone that gets on a blood pressure medicine can never stop taking it.
Well, my wife's diabetic, right? So, I mean, insulin is, and, when we talk about medicine in our country, first off, my wife spent 155 nights at Hopkins fighting for her life. So the bill for that came, right? So, we understand that at a different level than most people do unless they've been in that circumstance. But then there's just also the notion that the government is involved in this, whether it wants to be or not, and the cost of it, and the legalization of it, and quite frankly, how much a pharmacist can prescribe and how much a doctor. We're all sort of on some sort of honor system on all of this, right? And
yeah, we used to be. I mean, now the constraints are, government has recognized that opioids are a problem here. And so now there are all sorts of constraints that go into the prescribing and or dispensing of that. And yet, it's not fixing the problem. It's one of the reasons why I decided to get involved with cannabis, is my understanding of how this really is the answer to the opioid crisis. In this country, we have 5% of the world's population. We consume 80% of the world's opioids. If that doesn't illustrate how much of a problem this is. And here's the facts. In states that legalize, within the first year, on average, you see a 25% decrease in opioid overdose and death.
Brian Sanderoff is here from Curio Wellness, and if you've driven up and down York Road and it's possible, tell everybody what your place is, because a lot of the medical cannabis places we've seen have a green cross. I've seen the entire industry evolve every time I've gotten off an airplane, literally just driving anywhere in Denver, anywhere in Washington, Oregon, and other parts of the country, now Massachusetts as well, Washington, D.C., but this has happened in Maryland, literally like it happened in Colorado right before our very eyes, where you're driving down the street, you see a place, you think, can I go in, can I not go in? Your place is way different than any of the other places, because the front of your place is sort of your old business, your middle business, which wasn't a pharmacy, but which is much more traditionally, I don't want to say GNC, because I think people in the malls are familiar with that, but holistic products, which is where you spent the bulk of the middle of your life, right? Like literally talking about ginkgo biloba, I can't even pronounce it, right? And other vitamins and other things that my son had anxiety, my wife with cancer, me with just being a yoga sort of namaste Buddhist dude would come to people like you and say, hey man, I get a cold and I don't want to take like neosynephrine, I don't want to go to the CVS aisle and be, all bombed out on a drug, like vitamin C, vitamin D, what Dr. Steve tells me over at Elliott Chiropractic Life. And of course, I'm a big chiropractic guy, right? So, I've been into all of different kinds of medicines and Eastern thoughts and yogic thoughts and all of that. I'm a different guy than the guy in Dundalk in 1978 that didn't know about this sort of stuff. And as you evolve, and here we are with a place that I can literally stop on York Road and buy medicinal cannabis, get an education, sit in the front room, do yoga, get a massage. You're offering a whole different experience than anything I've ever seen in Colorado or California or anywhere else, quite frankly, Brian.
Yeah, no, it's all true what you just said, and what we have here is a whole wellness center. It's not just a cannabis dispensary. It's as you said, the combination of a couple of different visions here. And so I have my holistic pharmacy with all the vitamins and minerals and herbs, and let me say that the supplements that we use are of a different grade. It's not the same kind of thing that you might see if you go into a local health food store or whatever. These are products that are made by specific companies that only make their products available to health professionals because they're a little bit more potent, a little bit more, sort of condition specific and clinically used. But we also have a teaching space and a yoga studio. We have 4 treatment rooms, acupuncture, massage, holistic skincare, and then we have the dispensary as well. And my idea has always been that there is a toolbox that we can use to help ourselves health-wise. When you go through traditional medical training, you only learn to use 2 tools, drugs and surgery. And we have a saying, and that is when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you go to your regular doctor, something's wrong with you, they're going to want to try to apply one of those 2 tools. Well, my contention has always been that toolbox is much bigger. Herbs, nutrients, lifestyle changes, all the things that you just mentioned. And as it turns out, a very useful, very versatile tool is this thing that we've known as pot or marijuana, that in our work here we call cannabis, and it's an amazing tool. Is it the tool for everybody? Absolutely not. Is it likely a tool that can be helpful for many people for a wide variety of health conditions that people are suffering from? 100% yes, and that's what I'm so excited about.
Well, it's no longer Raven season, and I know you're as bummed out about that as anybody. And you want to give any opinion on the game at all before we get? Because I can sit here and talk to you all day about all of this stuff, and I'm going to circle back. Brian Sanderoff here from Curio Wellness. If you've passed the corner of York and Timonium Road, you've passed Curio Wellness. You could stop in, see what they have to offer. I'll get to that, but give me a football. I've asked everybody in my section, all the smart people in my world. I've had Don Moeller on, Jeff Moeller on this week, and Bill Cole, and all of my buddies. Billy Yerman's going to find me at some point. We'll talk a little bit, too. That, I don't take phone calls anymore on Monday and all the screams of everything. But to have a coaching conversation, boy, there's a lot of meat on the bone from that football game that we would say Joe Flacco will never throw another pass, and we'll never know and why. And Lamar rallied back, and where is the coach, and where are they moving forward? It's a crossroads, really, for the organization, I think, in many, many ways.
As a really, really, really long-term fan of the Ravens, right from the very beginning, I had found that at the beginning of this year, I was getting a little apathetic about the team and the sport. And for me, having Lamar Jackson come in infused some spirit, not just into the team, but into the fans and, personally into me. And the last few weeks of the season, and then, of course, the playoffs, I was, for the first time in a while, excited and looking forward and couldn't wait for Sunday to happen like it used to be in the good old days. That being said, my biggest disappointment with that game were the fans that were sitting around me. I cannot believe how uneducated about football some Baltimore Ravens football fans are. The same people that 8 weeks ago were screaming for Joe Flacco's head were booing and wanting to see Joe Flacco back in there. And I like Joe. I think he's a good guy. I think he did great things here. And if Lamar got sacked, 5 or 6 times?
7.
Flacco would have been. Flacco would have been sacked. Another 6 more. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. To me, the deficiency was in the offensive line. I don't know what was wrong with them, but they didn't have a very good game.
Well, they lost one-on-one battles, but the Chargers schemed things up differently and brought different bodies. And in the aftermath of it, the sad part for me is hearing the Chargers players say, we knew it was coming 70% of the time. And Gus Bradley employed something that they hadn't seen, something they couldn't work with, and more than that, just the mistakes. I mean, the word now is slap the ball out of Lamar Jackson's hands. He's going to have to deal with that. He's going to have to read defenses and beat defenses and be able to consistently do that, and that's what the offseason's about. It's about improvement for him. They've made their decision, right? I mean, on that, and the interesting part for me in the aftermath was the Harbaugh-Bisciotti marriage. And now that I see the Packers and the Cardinals and the Buccaneers filling jobs, I'm convinced they're going to work this out, and Harbaugh is going to be the guy here. So at least that puts that to bed. Now what happens with C.J. Mosley? What are you going to get for Joe Flacco? They can't win another football game for 8 months. So now it really does get into the management side of this, the talent evaluation. What happens with Suggs? What happens with Yonda? Where are they with Weddle? These are all really interesting conversations unto themselves, but then how are they going to be a better football team? And there's no more Joe Flacco's there on the end of the bench as some sort of a backup plan that they never used. I mean, I'm really sort of shocked that Joe never threw another pass. If he goes and wins 12 games next year and 10 games the next year and 9 games the next year and is playing football in 2 out of the next 3 Januaries, there's going to be a lot of splaining to do around here, really.
Yeah, I get that. I understand. I agree with you, although I will still contend that even if he does go somewhere else and do that, God love him, and that's great.
As long as he's not a Redskin.
Here.
It won't be God love him if he's with the Redskins.
I agree with that. Or a Steeler. Or a Patriot.
Yeah, I guess all 3 are possibilities, right?
Yeah.
God, you just depressed me. Curio Wellness is our newest sponsor. You're going to be hearing from Brian Sanderoff every couple of weeks here. We will be talking about all the things that you're not allowed to talk about on the radio. So look, I'm from Dundalk, right? It's not the first time I've, heard an Ozzy Osbourne song or, saw a marijuana leaf on a hat or a shirt at the mall in Highlandtown, in Canton, in Ocean City, on Dundalk Avenue, whatever. The fact that there is that there's a bridge between buying it illicitly, as many people did in our society, and my parents who were from another generation screening, governmental late-night MTV funny videos about, the madness, reefer madness, and all that stuff. Where we are in 2019, where a guy like you is on a corner now at York and Timonium Road, I think the real delineation here is going to be who is teaching whom what this is, how to use this, the way to use this, how expensive it is, how it's going to become more along the lines of recreational in our society, because I see it, because I fly west of the Mississippi and I see where all this is going, and the industry and the legal part of this. I guess this is going to be our ongoing conversation, right? Every couple of weeks, we're going to get together and talk about this, as well as football and baseball and basketball and where you are in all of this. But give me the time that you went to bed one night and were a pharmacist, and the next day were an herbal nutritionist doing cool things in spaces where, my son came to you 10 years ago and said, hey, I'm having this issue. Can you help me out? To now being someone on the radio with me talking about legal, medical, and then I guess at some point where recreational becomes like, hey, I really want to know how this works and the science of this, because I saw Sanjay Gupta talking about it, and my buddy Brian, who I knew from college or I knew from the pharmacy or I knew from Holistic, is now doing this, and he has these educational classes on the 3rd Wednesday of the month, and you might want to drop in and hang out for an hour because you might learn something, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, once a month, the 3rd Wednesday of every month, including the 16th of January, I do a class which is called Medical Cannabis 101, and it's just a good introduction to why this is so important, what happens in the body, the receptor sites and the endocannabinoid system, and why cannabis can seem like almost like a miracle cure for so many different things: pain, anxiety, sleep, depression, ADD, ADHD. I can't tell you the stories, and hopefully we'll get to share some of those on the air.
Well, I would just say Google it, right? I mean, all the information, the information's, no one's hiding it from you other than the federal government, right? I mean, but it's sitting there, and it's why news organizations are talking about it. People like me at 50 are thinking about it differently and getting educated when your wife has cancer twice, right? Or you've seen people in your family struggle with all sorts of things, including, my father's generation and dementia and all sorts of problems and anxiety and pain and seeing people have their lives wrecked by pharmacists, right? You know what I mean? I buried a friend last year who clearly had an addiction problem that was being treated by doctors that he's now in the earth somewhere in Anne Arundel County. And, I'm 50. I have a lot of questions, and I don't know that I have all the answers, but the journalist in me searches that, Bri. You know what I mean? The journalist in me looks for that,
Yeah, of course. And I think that's part of all of us as being humans is trying to find what's best for us. And we each have a different experience of life. And, I think sometimes we go through our struggles for important reasons, even if it feels like it's struggling now. We can look back and say, wow, that was a seminal part of life that helped me change and turn things around or whatever. It's an understanding of the biochemistry and what goes on in the body. And for me, when I was first approached a couple years ago to look into this, my first reaction was, wait a second, I was taught that, this is just for fun, it's not a medicine. In fact, our government tells us that there is no medical use for this chemical. And so I had to do some research. And
it really goes to Nixon there, right? I mean, if you trace it back to where Nixon was where it became really bad again, right?
Yeah, or maybe Barbara Bush, just say no. This is your brain on drugs kind of thing.
Nancy Reagan, sure, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. I don't know. Those old Republicans.
Okay, fair enough.
So, but that's been going on. I mean, when did Reefer Madness come out? In the 30s, when or early 40s, when again there was sort of a campaign against this for more political reasons than actual health reasons. And as you had pointed out,
1936, by the way. There you go. Reefer Madness.
There you go. Okay. Have you ever watched it? Did you watch the movie?
Like late at night on MTV, a million, but not when the people start turning green and stuff. It's
right.
It is kind of hilarious, but it's almost 100 years old, right?
Wow.
And
it to me, it's worth watching again because of how ridiculous it is now. When we look at it and think about that propaganda and how we had
100 years old.
A new medium to. To try to reach people in a mass way, and this was using that medium in a very effective way. Unfortunately, not in a very truthful or honest way. But for me, it was understanding the biochemistry. Two specific facts really made me turn my head and say, "Wow, this is for real." One of them is that this system of receptor sites in the body is ancient. I mean, it's millions of years old, and many creatures on this planet have these receptor sites, which to me spoke to evolution and natural selection. And then number two is that people that have a higher density of these receptor sites, these endocannabinoid receptor sites in their body, have a tendency to live longer. Those two things are what made me look at this and say, wait a second, there's something here. And then I, really sort of got into it and understood exactly what's happening. And it's a fascinating story. And, to me, the more important thing is the people that walk out of here having had lives changed because of this medicine now.
He is Brian Sanderoff. He's been my friend for, going on 3 decades now, and he's out of Curio Wellness. I got the shirt, and if you drive by York and Timonium Road, you got questions. If you're just looking for education on it, as I have been over the last decade, as I've seen it sort of appear and cancer appearing, and I think CBD is another thing that people hear it. I don't even know what it stands for, right? But we're all along. I hear that everywhere I go now.
Yep.
That people talk about that in a way that we're all looking for some sort of understanding on that, as I think we're all looking for understanding on how the opioid crisis is affecting Harford County, quite frankly, right?
Do you know, not just Harford County, do you know that actually the life expectancy in Maryland has gone down from last year, and they're attributing that to the opioid crisis?
Wow.
That's amazing, right?
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that other than something needs to be done, right? And obviously,
exactly.
This is where somebody like you comes in and says that this is an alternative way to do this. That's not that, right?
Yep, exactly right. And hopefully, we'll be able to delve into this a little bit more as as we spend some time together on the air. But cannabis doesn't numb us to pain like an opioid does. It changes our relationship to pain, and that has the opportunity to have that pain and how that pain is perceived change. And so. And the bottom line is you can't overdose from cannabis. The receptor sites that the cannabis hits, there's none of them in the part of the brain that controls respiration. So you literally cannot OD. Now, that's not to say that somebody hasn't gotten high and then done something stupid and ended up dying because of it, but from the actual chemical, you can't OD. That's not the case with opioids. It's not the case with alcohol. It's not the case with benzodiazepines. And so very, very safe and oftentimes very effective. It's just that we want people to use it in a guided manner. You had mentioned, how the tide is going towards adult use or rec use. And in my mind, I think about it as I want people to be able to use this medicine in a guided manner, just like herbs. People could grow their own St. John's wort and try to use it, or they could, work with a health professional that can help guide them to use it the most appropriate way for them.
Yeah, I got to come in there and talk to you about all the holistic stuff you do in the front of your place. And I think one of the things about your place is not very intimidating in the I have to show ID to enter the building. No. And I think the other part is you have a very, very obvious educational facility set up in the front window that people can see what you're doing there. Tell everybody just what is the step if they're listening and they want to call Brian and they want to just take a step to actually talk to someone about this and not learn it on the street or on the internet or off a television, to actually come in and have a professional sort of guided experience. That's where you set yourself apart, I think, really, at Curio.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So a couple different ways. Number one, Curio, C-U-R-I-O, CurioWellness.com is the website, and that's the portal to a lot of information as well as our schedule of classes and all that sort of stuff. People are always welcome to call here. The number is 443-484-8600. And they are welcome to walk in, as you said. We have a whole public part of this dispensary. Most dispensaries, when you go in, it's ID, you have to be registered, all that stuff. That's not the case here. And so people come in here for their vitamins, they come here for a consultation, they come in here for a class or a treatment, massage, acupuncture, whatever, and don't have anything to do with cannabis. People are welcome to come in all they want. If they want to do a consult with me, best thing to do is to call to make an appointment to make sure that I'll have the time, available for them so that we can sit down and go over what's ever going on with them. And sometimes that is about cannabis and sometimes it's not. And so it's about their health. And, I've attracted people who are interested in finding a different way for their bodies to work. And that's what we look to do. And we open up the lid of that toolbox and we find what's the best tool for each individual person. Where the address is 2060 York Road. People that are familiar with the area, we're right across the street from the Nautilus Diner, if that makes it easier, just a tad south of Timonium Road on York.
Curio Wellness, our newest sponsor. We're going to be hearing from Brian Sanderoff every couple of weeks. He's been my pal for years. We're going to talk some sports. We're going to mix in some conversation and some education. Stop and see him. We'll be telling you more about him. And I got to watch the Patriots play this week, right? And the Colts.
Not me. I'm done. I can't. Every year when this happens, I just can't watch it for a couple weeks.
Oh, come on. Don't be a sore loser.
No, not a sore loser. It's just, I don't know. It's the reflux that happens.
Coulda, shoulda, woulda, mighta,
exactly.
All that. We'll be down in Atlanta in a couple weeks. Brian Sanderoff can be found out at Curio Wellness on York Road. You can find me out on the BuyAToyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We got the Facebook Live going. We got the YouTube Live going. We're going to have it going down on the set in Atlanta for All Things Radio Row and Super Bowl 53. Luke and I are headed down there in a couple of weeks. We're mixing in Terps. I'm mixing in Orioles. We're getting ready for spring training, trying to figure out all parts of the Ravens residue in the aftermath of the loss to the San Diego, Los Angeles, Carson, soon-to-be Inglewood Chargers. And that's a mouthful. And I didn't even say Anaheim. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.